Welcome to today's MicroMoment. We have been getting quite a few questions recently about shortcuts. Can I do a shortcut here? Can I do a shortcut there? If I do this, well then will that make it easier or faster for me to get the project done? And most of these questions about shortcuts have to do with canning. So I thought we would just take a moment and talk about shortcuts in canning. Should we do them or should we not do them? Can we do some but not others? So let's talk about it for just a few minutes. First of all, I love shortcuts. I really appreciate it when I can either save time or money by doing things in a more efficient way. So I think it is human nature for us to have a desire to do things in a faster way than may be prescribed. Now, the questions that we are getting kind of fall into about three categories. First of all is processing times for canning. Is there anything that we can do to shorten those processing times? If I do this, can I shorten the time? Well, one of the most popular questions we get along those lines is this. So the USDA says to can whatever it is in pint jars, but I don't want a pint jar, and they don't give any reference for a half pint jar. So can't I just cut the processing time in half and do it that way? Well, the answer is no. Think about that for just a moment. Generally speaking, for anything having to do with meat, for instance, pints are processed for 75 minutes and quarts are processed for 90 minutes. So if that logic were to hold true, if we wanted to can a pint and not a quart, but we wanted to do the quart time cut in half, that would be only 45 minutes, when in reality USDA tested time is 75 minutes. And so you can't just say, well, I want to do half time for this one based on full time for this one. So what do we do? Can we do that at all? Well, yes, in some cases it's just fine to do that. But if we're going to can in a smaller jar, we have to use the processing time for the next jar larger. So if you are canning anything in a 24-ounce jar, and there are 24-ounce jars around, I actually quite like that size. But the USDA doesn't give any processing times for 24-ounce jars. So what processing time do we use? We use the quart time. So we can be smart about that. I've also had a question, if I add vinegar, doesn't that shorten the processing time? No, I'm not sure of the logic behind that one, but that is not the case. And someone else has asked, well, if I cook the food first, instead of doing a raw pack, if I cook it all the way, or another one is if I take it out of the can and it is already cooked and I just want to recan it, can't I shorten the processing time? And the answer is no, not to be safe. So those shortcuts really are not safe to use, especially when it comes to anything that we are doing with pressure canning, because of the possibility of botulism. Now, another question we get quite often is, in terms of doing shortcuts, can't I just use a mayonnaise jar that I've cleaned out from the store and I've washed it and it's sterile? Can't I just use that for canning? Well, I mean, of course you can, but the real question is it safe to do that? And while it might survive water bath canning, and the USDA says in some cases using recycled jars like that in water bath canning may be okay, but you always run the risk of breakage when that happens, because those jars really are not intended for the higher heat, long-term heat. So that's really not anything I would ever do at all. And then, of course, there are always questions about lids. I have drawers full of these flats, and they've all been used once. The rubberized sealer looks just fine to me. Can't I just use these a second time? Well, you'll find some people on YouTube to tell you that yes, you certainly can use them a second time. Just put them in a little boiling water and soften up that compound, and you can use them a second time. And you know what? They may be okay. But the real question is, are you willing to take a chance? The manufacturer has says these are one use for canning. Now, I use these all the time for sealing jars with dried foods. When I do dehydrated or freeze-dried foods, I use these lids and they work just fine for that. But I don't ever reuse these for canning. I just don't want to take the chance, especially if I'm doing something like meat that is very expensive. I don't want to take a chance that these are not going to either make a seal in the first place or hold a seal long term. So I don't do that, and I would not recommend it. Then another shortcut that we get asked is, and that we hear about a lot is, I just don't want to take all of the time to pressure can green beans or corn or whatever. I'm just going to water bath those. And that is certainly a shortcut that none of us should be taking. The difference between low acid foods like vegetables and high acid foods is that low acid foods are susceptible to botulism, where high acid foods are not. And so don't take a chance. The best route for all of us to follow is to follow the tested recipes for USDA and the tested processing times for USDA. And another one is, well, I want to use my own recipe for salsa. Can't I just pressure can it? Well, you may not be aware, but the USDA now recommends the acidification for tomatoes regardless of whether you water bath can them or pressure can them. And so don't take that shortcut. Don't think that pressure canning anything with tomatoes in it compensates for the lack of proper acidity, because it will not. Don't take that shortcut. So is there anything that you can do? Well, yes, if you want to look at it just a little bit differently, and those things might be in the area of being more efficient with your time. For instance, if you're going to be doing on Saturday is really the only day that I have to do my big projects. After work, when I get home, there's just not enough time to do long-term canning. And Sunday is my church day, and I don't do things like that on Sunday. I need a day of rest. And so Saturday is my big day for doing big projects. But I can do a lot on Friday night. And if I'm peeling potatoes or chopping up carrots or even chunking meat, I can do that the night before and get it in the refrigerator. So on Saturday morning when I get up to get things done, I can just take those things out of the refrigerator and they are already ready. So shortcutting like that by chunking your time and not trying to do everything all at one time may not be a true shortcut, but it sure feels a whole lot better on Saturday morning when I have a big chunk of stuff already done. So I just wanted to share these things with you to remind us that when we take shortcuts, I take shortcuts on the trail all the time in my truck, on our four-wheelers. If we have a quicker way to get there, then we usually take it. I do shortcuts in sewing. I know a ton of shortcuts when I do sewing. I do shortcuts in baking, but none of those things are as pertinent to our safety as is processing and canning our own foods. So with canning, I would avoid all shortcuts if it has to do with processing times or equipment like jars and lids, or the method. Use water bath canning for high acid foods, pressure canning for low acid foods. So I hope this little reminder is in fact just that, a good reminder for us to keep on the path of food safety. And that is it for this week's MicroMoment, and we will see you again next week.